realized as I was editing today's show that I neglected some important information when I talked about the meditations that are on my website. I recorded the meditations in 3 different types of languaging. One is inclusive language, one is for parents of multiples, and one is the motherhood collection, which uses mom and motherhood. The pregnancy meditations also come in the same languaging, and they're available for anyone pregnant who needs a little extra support. Our hypnobirthing meditations that we use in class are listed in order. You can purchase and download them today and get started. Please DM me on any platform if you have any questions, and let's get to today's show. Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Let me start out today with Ashley and I are educators before we're doulas. And I want to preface that by everything that comes out of our mouth as a doula is from our education point of view. And so as we're talking today about adding a doula to your team, my main goal is to convince you to add a doula to your team. And I know there's a lot of resistance to that for budgetary reasons, for privacy reasons, for my partner doesn't want anyone extra there. I absolutely get that. And why I want to recognize that those are real things that people are coming to birth with. I also want to set you up for success in your birth experience. And as an educator, I know that you not only need to be educated, but you also need to have the right support to get through the medical system that we have today, where we are losing more moms and babies than we ever have before. With all the technology we have, with all the money we dump into our system, you're the last person considered. And education for you, your partner, and your doula is so critically important. And education does not replace a doula, and doula does not replace education. It's a kind of a package deal. So we want to help you find that exact right support for you, as well as the right education for you. And in this modern day, y'all, there is no excuse not to be educated. There are podcasts, books, videos, friends, birth workers on every corner in every area of the country. And it's also very overwhelming. And I'm speaking to millennials. You guys, I know how overwhelming it is. It's like so overwhelming. You don't know where to start. So you stall and you don't get anything. And then at the end, you panic. We want to prevent that. We want you to have a beautiful birth experience. We know you can have a beautiful birth experience, and we want you to start early. My Gen Zers are already starting and they're not pregnant. There's some of them aren't even considering having babies, but they're getting educated now. We want you to understand the importance of education. We want you to understand the importance of having doula support or extra support at your birth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Even though it is overwhelming, it doesn't make it any less your responsibility to yourself and to your baby to prepare for what's going to happen. I understand you're fearful. I understand that you may feel paralyzed by all the information and by what you can't control of the situation. But the only thing you can control is your education. The only thing you can control is the practice that you bring into your birth with, the breathing techniques that you bring into your birth, because whether you want a medicated or not medicated birth, the only thing you can control is your breathing. And that makes a huge difference in how you feel comfort, how your baby is getting oxygen, and how you move through the experience. And if you're in fight or flight and panic mode, your body does not breathe well. Your brain does not move forward well. Your labor does not move forward well. The more education and information you get about how your body works in optimal positions and how to get your body back in an optimal position if something kind of sparks you into the fight or fright or freeze mode, the better your labor and your birth experience is going to be. When you walk into birth, understanding how your body works, where you're at in labor, what pitfalls can come up and how to navigate through those, you can have a powerful birth experience, whether it's medicated or not medicated, whether it's surgical or not surgical. And we want you to feel prepared, but it starts with you. I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do right now. Start early. The earlier, the better. If we have an Oh My God, I'm Pregnant class that's online that you can get as soon as you're pregnant, that you haven't told anybody that you're pregnant, which lists out where you can start and how you can start taking control of the situation. Once you start early in educating yourself and understanding how things work and what avenues to travel down to get educated, you're going to feel calmer and more in control. We want you to enjoy your pregnancy. And the earlier you start, the better. And Ashley, you can attest to this, how many parents call us at 36 weeks?
Oh my God. It feels like, not the majority, but there is a big chunk or contingency of parents that kind of realize at 36 weeks that they have to have a baby. And they've been like just sort of surviving pregnancy or going through pregnancy or even, blissfully enjoying pregnancy. And then it comes to a screeching halt when they realize that this baby's coming out of their body one way or the other. And now they need support, and now they need education, and now they need all these things. And they're essentially out of time, right? Sometimes we can squeeze in a last minute class. Sometimes we can find a doula who's available last minute. But it's really hard when we find ourselves with somebody at the end of pregnancy and our hands are tied, right? I don't know what else to offer you. Start listening to these relaxations and try to read this book before you go into labor.
They're hard phone calls because
it's so hard.
Everybody has 10 months of pregnancy. I know you think you have 9, but you actually have 10. And if you wait because you're scared until the very last minute and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, like especially right now, we're at holiday time. And so everybody's in panic mode, like I have to have my class done by December, whatever, because I'm due in January and we'll be out of town. I get that. That's why I started advertising holiday classes in August, right? But you're not looking at that time. So if you are not pregnant yet, right now is when you start thinking, okay, if I'm pregnant in February, that's when I start reaching out. So that's number 2 is reach out early. There are doulas and birth educators all across the country, all across the world, wherever you are, that you can reach out to early on, even when you haven't told your family yet, to say, what's available in my area? What long-term classes, short-term classes, what's available? Who do you recommend, right? Birth educators know everybody. We know the doulas, we know the prenatal yoga instructors, we know which hospitals are the best, we know all of that stuff. Reach out to me early so that I can help guide you to say, okay, what's your insurance like? Where are you going? What kind of birth do you want? You might not even know what kind of birth you want. Even if you want a medicated birth, you are going to navigate that better and all the possible interventions and cascade of interventions that may accompany that if you have the right education and you have the right support. Reach out early. There's no excuse to not do that. And your baby needs you to navigate their birth experience. Bottom line, it's not just you. And I know that's also a stumbling block because you feel this heavy weight of responsibility of, what if I F this up for the baby? The best way not to F it up is to get educated and find out what your options are. We are here to help. We want to help you. I do that for free. I don't charge you for you calling me at 1 month pregnant. Like, great, here are the providers for you. Oh, you have, morning sickness and you need an acupuncturist? Here are my favorite ones, right? We want you to feel that support. And our extended village only is extended if you call us first, because we don't know that you're suffering in silence or that you're scared in silence or that you're super excited in silence. You need to reach out to us. We are here. This is what we do for a living, and we want to be your best support. And third, I need you to get a handle on your fear. We all come into birth with fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of how my body's going to work, the fear of, oh my gosh, I don't want to poop. Oh my gosh, what if my partner sees me poop? What if I have a baby in the car? Like, there's a list of things that happen. How am I going to navigate boundaries with my in-laws and my mother and whatever? We have a lot of fears when it comes to birth because we haven't seen it supported for hundreds of years. And there are ways to start navigating your fear. Talking about them is number 1 with those people that you're reaching out to. You can, and I'm not plugging my meditations, but I'm going to plug my meditations. You can go on my website in the shop and look through those meditations and see which one resonates with you. Start listening to reprogram your subconscious that thinks everything is fearful into a confidence building neural pathway that gets you to where you want to go. You need to start building those pathways. Your brain likes repetition, and that's why meditations and hypnosis works, because it starts to repattern old messaging into something that's more concrete and in a more positive light. Once you understand how your body works, those meditations become a very integral part of your practice, and they're calming. They have a calming effect on you. That's what we need whenever we walk into a hospital, birth center, home birth, whatever, is to feel grounded in who you are and where you're headed. It doesn't matter what shows up if you feel trusting and confident in your body and your baby and what path it needs to happen. What I'm asking you to do is take hold of your fear instead of being held captive by it. Because we can be a prisoner of our fear. I was for the first, 6 months of my pregnancy until I was faced with, oh my gosh, do or die. I got to figure this out. And I'm glad that I wanted an epidural. And when I was allergic to everything in the epidural, I had to make a choice. I cried solidly for 2 weeks first because I was like, what the fuck? I can't do this. And every bit of programming in my whole life came up for, you're weak. There's no way you can do this. Plus, I also had a mom that told me that. Like, you'll literally die in childbirth. You have no pain tolerance at all. What was I supposed to do? Thank goodness it was black or white for me. I either had to shit or get off the pot, literally. And that was my tipping point. You don't need a tipping point. Just take hold of the fear and figure it out. We are here to help. That's what any birth educator is going to want to do for you. And there's not a lack of them. There's plenty of us out there.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be in your area, right? Like, you can find somebody online, reach out to someone on Instagram, a birth educator you follow, and they will help connect you to people in your area, right? If something grabs a hold of you, something resonates with you that you see on TikTok, on Instagram, whatever, we are in this industry because we are of service. And the vast majority of us, when we get that DM that's like, hello, I'm scared and I need help, I'm not in your area, is there anyone you can recommend? We're here to help you. We're here to help you make connections. We're here to at least help make recommendations for what you should be looking for. So don't be afraid to reach out, even if it's somebody, even if it's like a random person on the internet that's a birth worker. If there's something that about their content that resonated with you, grab onto that, because they might be kind of leading you down the path that you need to be on to have the birth that you want to have.
And when we talk about doulas and education, not only do they pair really well together like cheese and wine, but they will help you navigate what can be the most beautiful and spiritual and sexy experience of your life. And remember the baby, you guys. This is their one birth. They get born one time. And while that's a big responsibility, you have everything it takes to navigate that responsibility. And with the right support, you're going to navigate it beautifully. We want you to have that support. So that's what today's episode is about. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get that support, even if you think, I can't afford a doula, I don't have that in my area. Like, we're going to help you figure that out.
Yeah, and we wanted to right off the top start talking about the fact that you need more than just a doula, right? Talking about how doulas don't replace education and education doesn't replace a doula. It's really like our perfect combination for the best birth outcomes is childbirth education in whatever form you can get it, and doula support. And we'll be talking about, kind of some of the sort of misinformation and misunderstandings about what doulas are, what they aren't, what they provide and what they don't provide as we go. But I think there is this sort of like misunderstanding that having a doula is all you need, or having education is all you need, and that doulas will educate you. Doulas are human beings, and we can do only so much in any given birth situation. And so that's why we really want families to know right off the top that if you can have both, that's how you're going to have the best possible outcomes in your birth. But I think another really sort of big thing with doulas and childbirth education is that they're just for one type of birth or one type of person, and that they don't necessarily fit into kind of the typical birth experience, which in the United States is in the hospital. And doulas are for every body. They are for every type of birth. And Kara can attest to this as well. I mean, we have literally supported every kind of birth imaginable, from accidental unassisted at home to planned and everything in between, from epidurals to unmedicated in the hospital to home birth to birth centers to, unexpected cesareans.
Well, and I think that's one of the biggest misnomers is, I'm just going to have an epidural in the hospital. I don't need a doula. And surely the hospital and the nurses know everything. I don't need to get educated at all. I'm just going to take that quick 3-hour hospital childbirth class on what to expect at the hospital and not get any other education. And that's going to be enough for me. And then you feel very helpless when you're tied to a bed and you have no idea how to navigate what is coming up during that birth. It is incredibly important to have full-on outside education as well as the support you need to walk through medicated, not medicated cesarean. It's important. I don't even know how to explain that.
Yeah. And I would argue that if, let's say, all you can afford is the hospital classes, a doula is even more important for you. So, and that's really where I was going with that, is that everybody sort of thinks of doulas as like midwives. They're for home births. They're for natural births. They're for, backyard yurt births.
We love the yurt birth. I still haven't been to a yurt birth.
And, they think that what doulas are bringing to the table is just incense and crystals and essential oils, which I don't want to offend Care, but we definitely bring more to the table than that. Although
I don't know.
Sometimes there is incense and essential oils involved in crystals. But this idea that sort of, and I know the media doesn't help, because often when doulas are mentioned in media, it's mentioned as this hippie crunchy person told me not to take medical advice. And they like to kind of use doulas as a scapegoat. But as I said, doulas are for every body and every birth type. And I often make the arguments to families that a medicated birth in a hospital needs a doula even more than a home birth with a midwife, because what doulas bring to the table, more than just massage and crystals and oil and all of that stuff, is advocacy, right? And reinforcing your education, helping make sure your wishes are met, and really being there for you. And this is clear in the evidence. Like, they have studied this, that doulas make a huge impact, especially in the hospital, on birth outcomes.
And I love when we bring science into it, because it's not that we want you to hire us. There's actually scientific proof that having the right support as well as education is what's going to help you have a positive birth experience. And you deserve a positive birth experience, and so does your baby. So just listen to the science. Start there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so here's the thing, right? Our latest data tells us that less than 10% of families will hire a doula to be at their birth, which is really hard to hear as an educator, because literally I feel like if all of my families that took my classes hired doulas, that it would just be a home run every time. And not even necessarily the door the baby came out of, but their satisfaction with their birth experience, because they would have this amazing education that we spent this time together learning, and then somebody to really help them bring it home and solidify it and put it into action. And so hearing that number that's really, between 6 and 10% is that's abysmal, in my opinion, because then especially when you dig into the data about the impact that doulas have. So there's a great article on evidence-based birth. You'll hear us reference evidence-based birth literally all the time, and we're going to have this article will be in the show notes, specifically about the evidence for doulas. And they look at also the evidence for any kind of continuous support that is not related to the hospital. And Care's definitely going to talk a little bit more about that later. But in specifically doulas, okay, doulas are associated with nearly 40% reduction in the risk of a cesarean. And I just want that to kind of like sink in a little bit. 40% reduction in the risk of a cesarean.
Maybe envision that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Doulas decrease your risk of a cesarean by 40%.
They're nearly cutting your risk in half. And there may be some people listening being like, hey, I had a cesarean. Cesareans aren't all bad. That's definitely not what we're saying. But we know that with the maternal mortality rate, what it is in this country, and you will even hear from obstetricians, gynecologists, that honestly, one of the biggest things that they are trying to figure out, and they're just not really going about it the right way, is reducing that primary cesarean, reducing the risk of a primary cesarean, because having a cesarean complicates all future pregnancies for the person who's had the cesarean. Having a cesarean is more dangerous than having a vaginal birth for most people. And having a cesarean complicates recovery and postpartum, and is associated with a much more difficult postpartum emotionally, mentally, than a vaginal birth is for most people. And so knowing that everybody across the board, from obstetricians to midwives to doulas, wants to reduce that primary cesarean rate. So when we are talking about hiring a doula, where is a doula going to have the biggest impact? In the hospital, where primary cesareans take place, right? And they did find an association of a 25% risk with support that wasn't a doula, so like a friend or family member. But having a professional doula or somebody with doula training had that biggest impact on that cesarean rate. So I know Kara can speak to this, that when we get families coming into our classes, honestly, most of the time, the number one fear or the number one thing they'll say coming into class is, I don't want a cesarean. And that's totally understandable. And so if they're asking me in class, what can I do to reduce that risk? The first thing I'm going to tell them is hire a doula, because they're just hiring a doula is cutting that risk in half. And that was across the board at whatever hospital they birthed at, even if it was a higher C-section rate hospital, lower C-section rate hospital, doulas had a positive impact.
And the side note is also, where are you birthing? Because if your hospital has a high cesarean rate, 40%, 50%, and you think, I'm going to be the exception, that hospital has a very high cesarean rate. That's how those doctors practice. So take into consideration, if you can switch to a hospital that has a better birth outcome and you have a doula, you're lowering your risk even further.
Yeah. And then add education in that. And honestly, that's the perfect trifecta. But that is for another episode. You know that we could spend hours and hours and hours talking about providers and cesarean rates and intervention rates and all of that. We definitely will. And it's not just cesareans, right? So when we talk about other positive outcomes that doulas have, an increase in the likelihood of a spontaneous vaginal birth, meaning reducing the risk of having an induction, a decrease in any type of medications used. So for people who want an unmedicated birth, a doula is a really important tool. Shorter labors, guys, shorter labors with the use of a doula. And I think no matter if you're medicated or unmedicated, the idea of meeting your baby a little bit faster and being in labor for less time is very appealing, right? And here's one that people don't really realize, like how a doula's reach extends beyond just the person having the baby. There was nearly a 40% decrease in the risk of baby having a low APGAR score. And APGAR scores are your baby's first grade that they get, where they tell you, how good your baby's looking, how good they're breathing, how good their color looks, all of that stuff. And a low APGAR score is a risk of poor birth outcomes. It's a baby that's struggling, right, in the first few minutes of their birth. And there was nearly a 40% decrease in babies having low APGAR scores with the use of a doula. So the doula's impact extends beyond the body and the birth experience and, pain management and all of that stuff, but actually to the baby as well, and how the baby responds to being born. And that's incredible, because the infant mortality rate just went up in the United States for the first time in 10 years. It's not going down. It's not getting better. And so anything we can do to bolster that baby's chances of having good birth outcomes
and a better chance of survival is basically what that means.
Yeah, it needs to be added to the mix. So I think it's a great argument for doulas that it's not just for the person having the baby. It's also for the partner, but it's also for the baby. And then the biggest one was this big increase, 30% increase in the satisfaction with the birth. 30% decrease in the risk of being dissatisfied with their birth experience. So nearly a third decrease in birth dissatisfaction. And you will hear a lot of people be very dismissive about birth satisfaction, how people feel about their birth experience. And birth workers everywhere will bristle at the, healthy mom, healthy baby, healthy parent, healthy baby, because surviving is the bare minimum. And giving birth and being born impact us for the rest of our lives, change us for the rest of our lives. And birth trauma is very, very real. Anything we go through that involves our body, and especially when it involves medical treatment of our body, can cause trauma, right? And we know that there's an epidemic of birth trauma in this country more than any other country, honestly, in the developed world. When we're looking at how people report feeling about their birth experiences and talking about their birth experiences, we have the highest rate of reported birth trauma in the developed world. And when they do studies talking to parents about their birth experiences, a huge portion of parents, both the parent giving birth and the partners, report viewing their birth experiences as traumatic. So when I say doulas are in the business of trauma mitigation, that is why we're here. That is what we're here for, because we want all of the stuff, right? We want to shorten your labor. We want to reduce your risk of medication if you don't want medication. We want to reduce your risk of cesarean. But more than anything, we want you to leave your birth and your baby to leave your birth without trauma or with as little trauma as possible. And we're hoping that that will impact future generations in a positive way and hopefully avoid some of the trauma that these past few generations have experienced in their births, both giving birth and being born.
And what we're watching as educators and as doulas is that parents are mitigating trauma. They're getting educated, they're finding the right support, they're going into their birth experience feeling confident and knowledgeable about their body, about labor, about physiological birth, which physiological birth is such a big word. But physiological birth is just the way your body would naturally work if it was in the wild. How does this process actually work? And when you understand that and you go, oh, I could labor standing upright and I could get hip presses and I could be eating and drinking and I could cuddle with my dog for comfort and I could stay home longer and I could show up later in the game than right at the front because I'm terrified. Running to an institution because you're scared will only add hours onto your labor. If you're in the comfort of your own home and you have the right support and you're not fear-based and you're moving through one contraction, one surge at a time with the power you already have in your body, with the physiological process that's happening, it's a different experience. It doesn't mean you can't leave and go get medication when it's the right time, but the intimate time that you spend outside of that institution or business building, office building is what I like to call a hospital, it can change the outcome. And we see it every day. So why we talk about this is because we're so passionate as educators and doulas, because we know it can work. And the only control you have is the good information that you get within your body and the confidence that you build up ahead of time. Your body knows how to give birth. If I take you all on a desert island, which would be so amazing to all give birth on a desert island and just have each other, yes, we're going to want, papaya and pineapple and all the good stuff and maybe a few supporting cast members there, but your body is going to give birth. I'm going to come back in 6 months and we're going to have 7 babies. It knows what to do. You don't need any help. Obviously, help is good, but what kind of help do you actually need? And that's what you're going to find out in a birth education class and by adding a doula for support. I think one of the number one, and Ashley, you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the number one things that I get in class with, yes, I want a doula, but I'm really private. So yes, they might have a thing with cost and they're really expensive and I'd rather take a birth class. I get that. But I'm really private and I don't want anyone around me but my partner. It needs to be very intimate. Understandable. I want to pose something to you. The nurses, the doctors, the midwives, the support staff are all strangers. They are in and out of your room all the time. Not that they're going to be helping you much, but they're all strangers. They're strangers giving you advice. They're strangers mitigating your birth plan. They are strangers that have no skin in the game as to what goes down in that birth room because they're there as their job. And not to say they're not doing a great job, they don't know you. And they don't understand what your pain tolerance is and what you actually really desire and all that kind of stuff. When you have a doula or a support person that's on the outside that you have gotten to know ahead of time, you've gone over all these scenarios, you've got backup plans, and these top 3 things are your number ones. When you're in the throes of labor, when you're in your monkey brain, your instinctual brain, because your frontal cortex is now gone and you're in a rhythm, that's the person that is going to be sane enough and cognitive enough to say, actually, nurse, this is what we're looking for because blah, 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 and help mitigate that because your partner is supporting you. It makes a huge difference in bringing your other familiar person because it is going to be a room full of strangers. And I've heard that before from parents, and I'm sure you have too, Ashley. They come back and they're like, I didn't know anybody. I felt so uncomfortable because here I am half naked and 4 interns walked in. That happens. And in best case scenarios, even if you've written on your birth plan, absolutely no strangers, no observers, it happens. And if you have that extra person that knows that's your biggest thing that can literally shield you, because I've done that at a birth before where I have jumped in between and said, she doesn't want anybody else in here. I'm throwing a curtain around, that's the importance of keeping that vulnerable time just between you and your partner, if that's what you want, because your familiar person, which is the doula, knows how to do that.
So yeah, there's actually a quote that I saw on Instagram that I tell students about all the time now, where it said, I almost didn't hire a doula because I was afraid of having a stranger in the room. And then at the end of my birth, I looked around and realized that my doula's face was the only one I recognized, and that everybody else in the room was a stranger. And we can get into scenarios like in cesareans or vaginal births where the baby needs a little extra support, where there's literally a dozen strangers because the NICU staff comes in. There's extra nurses in the room. I mean, it's literally a dozen strangers in the room, vagina out, partner scared. Who are you looking towards, right? And if you have your doula next to you saying, you've got this, it's okay, eyes on me, right? It can be the safest, most held, most supported feeling, even with your vagina out in a room full of strangers. And so I get it. I totally get it. I've had some very modest parents. I've had some very religious parents. The desire for privacy and intimacy is like it's literally it's in our DNA. Our deepest desires as mammals is to birth our babies in privacy. But in our current system, we are in a facility birthing with strangers. And so I just want you to keep that in mind, that a doula is somebody that you're going to build a relationship with over weeks or months, hopefully months, leading up to your birth experience, so that you essentially are bringing in an educated, supportive friend or family member who is there to advocate for you and be by your side. And so, yes, essentially they start as a stranger, but they will not be by the time they get to the birth. So I see that, I hear that, I feel that in my bones. I feel that. But we want to always just make that argument that your doula ultimately will not be a stranger to you.
It's one of the most intimate relationships I've had with people.
Yes.
Because yes, at every interview, it's a stranger, right? And it's uncomfortable. Like, how do I interview this lady who I want to come to my birth? Like, how do I know how to pick them?
See me naked and watch me poop and
right?
Watch a human come out of my vagina.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's because it's what we do. So it's not a big deal. It's kind of like you're hiring an RN who sees this all the time, right? But it's a feeling. Like because I am a little woo-woo with my crystals and my incense, whatever Ashley said. By the way, I only like frankincense incense. That's the only one I like. I feel like I've contracted with these families. There are things and synchronicities where I have fit into places and where my families have fit into my life where it wasn't by chance. I know that if I'm supposed to be a witness at a baby's birth, I'm going to be there. I know that when I teach doulas that. You're never going to miss a birth that you're not supposed to be there. Like it just doesn't happen. And if the contract is between, the parents and the baby or just the baby, you're not going to miss it. There is a level of understanding and spiritual woo that goes on in a birth room, whether you believe in it or not. I don't care if you believe in it. It happens and you will feel it. It is, the veil is very thin if we are going to go at the full woo with that.
And it's just it goes so much further beyond a business transactional relationship, just on a human level, right? This is, you are joining a family for the most important day of their life, really, where they're becoming a family for the first time or the second time or the third time. And you are called to this work because of your desire to serve people in this intimate moment. And that human connection, it really cannot be overstated. That's why we cry at births when the baby comes out, even if we've been to, 200 births, because that human moment, the pure love that's in the room, and it is so intimate and it is so connected. And I hate when people say, well, all your modesty goes out the window when you have a baby. Because I feel like that's really dismissive and rude to parents that do have these concerns about privacy and modesty. But when you feel safe, you're able to let go of that clenched fist onto that privacy and modesty. You're able to surrender to the sort of primal, intimate power of the moment because you feel safe and connected and held and loved by the people on your team. And you're only going to get that from the people that you have chosen to bring into that room, because the other people are strangers, right? So we want you to cultivate a safe place for yourself. And that starts with the team and the people that you are bringing in to connect with. And then you're able to release that and just connect with your baby and your body and allow it to happen without being scared or feeling ashamed or feeling, that desire to cover up and be modest. You won't need it. You won't need that safety because you're going to have the safety from the people that are with you.
And I can attest to that because from my religious background, I was freaked out about my nipples being out and my vagina open and who's going to see and all of that, because I had a bed. Not only was I religiously modest, but I had bad self-esteem when it came to my body. And I'd gained 60 something pounds when I was pregnant. So yeah, and I luckily did have that. And I felt very safe and very open to be where I needed to be in the moment. It literally wasn't even a second thought. And I was very surprised by that, but it's because I felt safe. So yeah, it's absolutely correct, everything you said, Ash. And let's go into partners. So here's one of the reasons we're so passionate about education and a doula not replacing your partner. I know that's a fear with partners. Like, I don't want to be, overrun by this other woman. This is my baby, my birth experience. I can figure this out. When you take a childbirth class together, and it is a class that you have researched, a class that really goes all in connecting you and your partner in the ideals that you want for your birth, the way you like to be touched, the way you want to be talked to, maybe a code word for when you want medication, whatever it is, and you have both learned together and kind of understand the process, the doula is literally the wingman for the partner. Literally. And I can tell you from my personal experience, I have never replaced a partner. If anything, I'm giving a little bit of direction, like, she's doing amazing. Let's get her in the shower. I'm going to go make you a sandwich. I already know ahead of time what to feed that partner because we've had a discussion about it. What's going to make that partner feel supported and safe and comfortable? If they need coffee, how am I going to cover up that smell in their mouth, right? Because they're like, no, dude, seriously. I had a partner who had to have whiskey and he had a flask and I was like, how am I going to do that? Like, I don't support that exactly. And the mom looked at me and she goes, it's what he needs. Just look the other way. He's going to do it. Okay. Like, what am I going to do? That's their team. I'm not going to report them. I'm also hopefully not even going to see it. But for that particular point of view, it's the only thing that was going to settle his nerves in the moment. I don't know their history. I'm here to support you as a team. And I don't sleep with you. I am not intimately connected with you, right? I don't live with you 24/7. I also don't have filters with you and recognize subtle things on your face that a partner is going to. From a professional standpoint, I know how to mitigate the labor. I know the positions. I know comfort and relief. But if I'm doing hip squeezes behind and your partner is the one holding you and you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable and throw yourself into their arms, that's going to do way more than my flippin' hip squeezes. Yeah. We do not replace a partner. And if that's what you're hiring them for, a doula for, then be clear about that. Like, he or she's not in the game. I need you 100%. And that's a different kind of scenario, right? Because we're talking about it for how is it going to best support you? But 99% of the births that I have supported, and as well in class when we're talking about doulas and stuff like that, doulas do not. And if you have the baseline of education where you both learn together, you guys, it is life-changing. You are connected before the baby shows up. The hormones and pheromones are working in that birth room. Your partner knows what you need before you know you need it because he or she is connected on a different level than I am. And that support goes for both of you, not just, I'm only going to support the doula or the mom.
Well, and I think that we don't necessarily have like a realistic handle on just how in the zone we get when we're in labor and we're in our bodies. And I always say we end up kind of communicating in like grunts and points as opposed to full sentences at a certain point. And I often work much more closely in a memorable way with the partner than with the person actually having the baby. And I say in a memorable way, and I mean for the person having the baby. They're barely going to notice that I'm there because I'm trying to keep everything very streamlined. I'm keeping everything very seamless for them, but they're in labor land, right? They're in the stars, okay? And so I am grounded on earth with the partner, telling them what to expect, what's happening. This is normal. This is what we're going to do next. Here's what you can expect. Here's what's coming up. And then we're also having conversations like, hey, here's what I think we need to do. This is the conversation I'm going to have with them next. I think that we need to do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to like it. They're going to take it a lot better coming from me than coming from you, right? Because we take everything personally when it comes from our partners. And I've had so many hesitant partners that I interview with, or that I have parents reach out and say, hey, I'm really struggling with getting my partner on board with the idea of hiring a doula because he doesn't want to be replaced. This is our baby's birth. And again, it's like reminding the partner, like, hey, you're hiring a doctor, you're hiring nurses. They're also strangers who are going to be involved in your baby's birth. But this is somebody that's going to walk the walk with you, like a choreographer, like a wedding planner, but with much higher stakes, right? This is the birth of your baby. And I have never had a partner at the end of the day unhappy with my care or dissatisfied with the fact that I was there. In fact, most of the time they end up just being so grateful for having that support, that person they could look to when the shit's hitting the fan and say like, what the fuck is going on? And me being able to be like, we're good. We got this. This is fine. We're doing great. This is great. And they're like, okay, are you sure? Yes, everything is great, right? I literally can't say enough. Like just like Kara said, when I interview with a family, I will say, like, I will never know them on the level that you know them. That's your role. The intimacy, what made you want to have a baby together, that connection you have, I will never be able to replicate that, replace that ever, ever, ever. And that is your job in the birth room, is to be that person to them. And my job is to be on the outside, helping you have the most successful birth experience with all of the outside stuff. And so I really want partners to hear that like, we're here to support you. And my doctor, when I had my kids, literally said to me that he loves doulas so much because the pressure on first-time parents is so outrageous. He said even more than what we expect from medical students is what we expect from first-time parents, especially the partners. That is to, handle the birth plan, handle the bags, never pee, never sleep, never eat. Remember everything from class so you can remind them how to do all the things you learned in class. But like, be steady, be a rock, don't get too emotional, don't be scared.
So unfair.
I mean, it's just the list goes on and on and on. That like, especially if it's your first time, you're like, how am I going to do this? And this is why partners will often find themselves also suffering with postpartum depression, also suffering with birth trauma, because they're watching the person they love most go through this incredibly harrowing experience just on their own.
And they feel
with
powerless.
Nobody to support them. They feel
like they're not enough. They feel like they shoulda, coulda, woulda. And it's a big deal.
Yes. And most partners that I work with and in class, I give them the same speech that is, you're a fixer. You're their fixer. I know you are because I also am married to one who wants to fix all my problems all the time. And if he could wave a magic wand and fix all my problems so I was never in pain or I was never suffering, I was never sad, he would do that because nothing pains him more than when I am struggling or I am suffering. You can't fix labor. Labor is something you have to go through. And the only thing you can do is walk alongside them. But who is going to walk alongside you as you walk them through it? And I think when partners hear that and realize that guess what? There's no fix for this. There's no fix for this. You are going to have tools, you're going to have education, and you're going to have support. But you have to go through it together. I think that really changes the perspective for them and realizing like, oh my God, there's no quick fix for this. All of my go-tos that I usually do in daily life, it's not going to work for this. Yeah, maybe I do need support. Yeah, maybe I do. So it is sometimes more for the partners even than it is for the person having the baby. So
this is the portion of the episode that you need to share with your partner.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you don't know until you're in the birth room, and then you realize what you don't know. And having that professional that is with you, that knows the intricacies of what you want, just makes it more seamless. And if you need a break to go out, stretch, get some coffee, and relax, you're not leaving her by herself. It makes a huge difference. If you need to go and meet and mitigate family, you're not leaving your most intimate partner alone, right? And if you need food, I can go get food for you. Like, it's just that extra level. And also, I think one thing that Ashley touched on that is so critical, and I've gotten so many compliments about that over my years of being a doula, is you knew what that nurse was going to say before they came in the room. I'm like, yeah, because it's the same every time, right? So it's pretty simple. I mean,
the spiel never changes.
Yeah, the experience, having someone that experience know what's going to come out before it comes in the room, and being able to say, just like Ashley said, okay, here's what's up next. They're going to offer this. They're going to do this. Let's make sure that you know what's going on with your baby and what's going on with her. And then let's talk about XYZ. Why don't you ask this if you're unsteady, and then you can make your decision. It is not we're convincing you of a certain thing, but we're giving you the opportunity to have the conversation or feel it out before you're faced with, oh my gosh, I got to make a yes or no decision right now. Because then you feel like if that decision, proposed a cascade that you weren't expecting, I didn't have enough, I wasn't prepared enough, and then you blame yourself. That's not what we want. We want you to remind you of what you already know, which is why education is so important. Because we can't teach you in the moment. It's nearly impossible because there's too many benefits, too many risks to go over in such a short amount of time, especially when there's an intensity of labor going on. So we're there to remind you what's coming up next so that you can have your quick conversations in order to make the next best decision. And that's where the satisfaction, I think, comes in, because you're not blindsided time and time again. You just understand it.
I was actually reminded of another big role that I've played that you kind of reminded me of, is that especially when people come in with their spiel and their thing that they want you to do and feeling pushed to make decisions or feeling rushed, some partners are bulldogs. I got one of those too, that are just they're guard dogs, right? Like they're literally going to feel like they have to go aggro on the staff to get what they want. And they have been told by all their friends and family, get ready for a fight, put those dukes up. And, doulas can be the olive branch. We can be the peacemakers. We can ask for time, ask for things, be the whisper in your ear saying, you don't need to get mad. This is what you're going to say instead. That we're literally there to help bridge that communication with the hospital staff to help you get what you want, rather than feeling like you're going in for a fight, rather than feeling like you have to have your guard up or be aggressive.
Because that's the last thing we want.
No,
that adds more time onto labors when there's that
more
energy.
Trauma, right? And so not everything has to be a fight. In fact, many things can be a simple ask. Right. But if you don't know how to ask or what to ask for or who to talk to, I mean, one of the big things I get that parents will ask is, what if a nurse comes in that just really doesn't vibe, that we can't communicate with, that's mean or rude or whatever, reminds me of my mom, whatever it is, how do I handle that? Do I just fire them? And I'm like, no, no, you don't need to do it like that. Not everything needs to be a fight. This is what we do. We ask for the charge nurse. The charge nurse comes in. We tell them, hey, we need to make a change. Wasn't that a much calmer, more peaceful, less traumatic way to handle that, rather than having to tell the nurse, get out, right? But when you have a doula there, that's just one bridge that can be built by that extra doula support, that experience that a doula has to know how to navigate those situations. It's an absolute game changer for the dynamics in the room.
So what happens in your mind? I have no doulas in my town. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Now I need support. What am I supposed to do? My first experience as a doula was a friend reaching out from church who said, military husband, he's not going to be here. I need your support. Can I count on you for my labor? I was 7 months pregnant at the time. I had no idea how to be a doula, what a doula was, which ended me getting a doula after this experience. But that was my first experience with birth. And she taught me how I'm going to teach you right now. She said, I'm reading this book. I've watched this video. I'm going to read this other book. And if you will get educated along with me, I think we can do this together. Now, this woman was a badass. Let me just tell you, her family Everyone gave birth naturally. It was no big deal to them. They weren't scared. I was still in the scared situation. Yes, I had transferred to a birth center, which is where she was going to birth, but I still had that little guy on my shoulder saying, you suck. There's no way you can do this. And here she was saying, if we get educated together, we can do this. Here's what the time expectation may be. I may call you at 2 a.m. and I'm going to need you right then. I'm going to labor by myself for as long as I can. But when I need you, I need you. Are you willing to do that? I'm like, yes, I'm a hell yes to that. I can do that. And then I don't know how long it's going to be. Can you do that with work? I'm like, I'll figure it out. Like it just, we had that understanding of I can drop everything and be there for you. Now let's get educated together. And the book she gave me, I don't remember the name of it. It was thick and it was about natural birth. And she had highlighted what she wanted me to read. And she's like, what I need from you is I need you to remind me to breathe. I need you to brush my hair because I think that's really comforting. And then I like hard massage. I'm like, okay. So she was doing her practice by herself. She had a rhythm and a routine. And I came over maybe 2 or 3 times during that pregnancy to talk about what was most important for her. She was already under the care of midwives. She had a good relationship with them, but she was very specific as what role she needed me to play. She had thought about it really early in the process. So we go back to the very front of this episode. Start early. If you know that you live in the middle of Timbuktu and there's nobody around other than a friend, a family member, somebody from church that you could ask, and they're willing to start early with you, you can really have good support. And while it might not be a professional doula, what if that support person said, you know what, I'll take a training. I would love to do that for you. And they took a training. Like, you don't know what you don't know until you ask. And the earlier you can find that person, and when it comes to a family or a friend, make sure it's somebody you can be really vulnerable with and that you can let your guard down with, and that you won't have maybe they might have unrealistic expectations of how they want things to go, but that they can just support how you want things to go. Because that's going to make a huge difference in who you choose to, which is random that this particular friend chose me because while I was going to give birth, I knew nothing about it. I was still in the early process of learning about hypnobirthing and what I was going to do. And yes, I transferred to a birth center, but I was still unsure of what that actually meant. I was very naive. But by getting educated together and kind of forming that team mentality and like, I can support you. I love you. I can do this. It made a huge difference. And when I saw her give birth, the way she was crowning in my car, you guys, by the time we got there, she was pushing in the car. And I didn't realize that until I saw a head. I was 90 miles an hour off the freeway getting her there. She pushed 3 pushes and that baby fell onto the bed. It was the most majestic kind of birth experience I could ever witness for the first time. And I sobbed for 2 solid weeks and could not stop talking about it. It was life-changing, and I was not a professional doula. So you have that opportunity if you look around at the people that you need in your community. So know that if a doula is out of possibility for you right now, it may not be, start early and see who you can find, because they can get trained. They have time to read the same books, and you guys can get a plan together.
Yeah, I mean, my first birth experience was also supporting of a friend. It was a friend's 19-year-old daughter who found herself pregnant, and I had toddler triplets, and I was around anyways, so I helped take her to appointments. The kids and I would take her to appointments and drop her off, and then when she went into labor, I was there for the birth. And I remember coming home from that birth and telling my husband, I loved every single part of it. Like talking to the medical staff, the placenta coming out afterwards, like every single part of it. None of it was gross. All of it was amazing. I think that I need to do this. And I literally left that birth being like, I think I need to be a doula. But I learned as I went, right? Like even when they would come in and offer something, I would Google it and we would have a conversation and talk about it. And I was acting as a doula, even though I didn't know like what a doula was or what I was actually doing. I thought I was just being there as a friend, but I was helping her advocate for herself. And I realized that I could feel that part of me sort of healing from my birth experience of being able to help someone in the moment in real time, like make educated choices. And I always will say that like that's the baby that made me a doula, even though I wasn't a trained doula yet, because it literally changed the entire course of my life, finding myself at that birth. And it was sort of the opposite of CARES. It was a long hospital birth. It was an induction for medical reasons. It was sleeping upright in a chair for the first time to kick off a many births that I would attend. And I would not change a thing about it. It was absolutely incredible. It was on Mother's Day that he was actually born. And it was so special, and it literally showed me what I was made of and what my capabilities were in terms of support. So I was just a family friend. That's all I was. I was just a friend. I was a mom, but I was just a friend, And so I was able to be exactly what that family needed, and not just for her, but for her mom as well. For the entire family to have that additional support made such a huge difference for them. And I know they look back on their birth with the same positive feelings about my presence that I do. And you can find that in someone. And I think it's important to think about, is it someone within my family? Maybe for some people that relationship is with their mom or with their sister or with a cousin, or maybe it's a friend, right? We just want to know that when we're looking to someone close to us to step into that role, that they're able to set any baggage that they have around our relationship aside. I have had lots of grandmas step into the doula-ing role, and I always make a point to tell them, the hardest thing you're ever going to do or go through is watch your baby go through this, similar to a partner, this incredibly harrowing experience, and not be able to do anything to make it go away. And you've spent your entire life fixing the boo-boos and taking care of the owies and comforting away the sickness, that you can't do that for somebody who's in labor, because the way is through and all you can do is walk alongside them. So really preparing them for that, like the realities of what birth is, having them get educated, talking to them about really what you need, as like what your expectations are about what you're going to need when you're in labor, what everybody needs when they're in labor, and setting boundaries like early on about like, okay, when I say no, or I say stop, or I don't want you guys talking idle chit chat to each other, even though, mother-in-law and husband have a very close relationship. I don't want you talking about stuff, and really setting those expectations ahead of time with whoever that is, with your mom, your sister, your friend, is going to allow them to best serve you and support you. With our partners, we already have that kind of intimate relationship where we're really very real with each other. In most people's relationships, we tend to have more guards up, be a little more formal with the other people in our lives, where it's harder for us to say really what we want, to really show what we want and need from them. And we have to let those guards come down if we want them to support us in labor. And remember that whoever you're having come in has to be somebody that you're comfortable in this intimate environment, with the burping and the pooping and the bleeding and the realities of birth, that they're comfortable with it and you're comfortable with them witnessing it. So those are things that you want to consider too when you're deciding who you're going to ask to step into that role.
And I hope that after this episode, you've come away with extra support is non-negotiable. You deserve it. Your baby deserves it. Your partner deserves it. It can change the outcome of how you feel about your birth, and also the support that your baby is given in the room as they're being born. Extra support is non-negotiable in my mind, and the education that you will get ahead of time will hopefully help you see why you need it. And next week, we're going to talk about some more things about how to get a doula.
Yeah, next week's episode, we're going to dig into the realities of actually adding a doula to your team, right? And so you've made the decision that you're not just going to have a family member step in, or you're not just going to go through this with your partner on your own. You're going to hire a professional, have a professional doula come into your birth space. We're going to get into the actual like nitty gritty of adding a doula to your team.
And also know, if you're having a support person other than a professional show up, if I know that you have a grandma and she's going to be your doula, I might not have grandma sit through the classes that you guys are sitting through, because they are so intimate, and I want you and your partner to be bonding and feel absolutely vulnerable in that situation. Grandma might get to sit in one of my other class series as a doula, so she understands what you're learning, but she doesn't interfere with the intimacy that you two are doing in your actual birth class. So know that's something that we do all the time. So that may be an option for your birth educators. I'm not sure, everybody does it differently, but ask them about that. Sometimes they will audit a class series that you're taking, or they'll pay to get educated the same way, but not actually in your series. It works really well for everybody being on the same page, especially for practice and touch and relaxation and all of that. But it also doesn't interfere with the intimacy that can be taken care of during childbirth class. So we're excited that you will join us next week, where we wrap up for now what we're talking about with doulas.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.